I'll look now into the history of Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, and white supremacy. A group of historians, authors, and community activists discuss these concepts at an event hosted by the Council of American Islamic Relations.
Welcome to this first panel, this first breakout section on the intersections of Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, and white nationalism, white supremacy. My name is Erica Lee. I'm a professor of history and Asian American studies at the University of Minnesota. I also direct, when I'm not on leave, the Immigration History Research Center. And I just want to say this conference is phenomenal. It doesn't exist in many other places in that it brings together amazing scholars and experts nationally and internationally, pioneers in the ways in which we understand both the consequences, the roots of Islamophobia, but also in a really accessible and community-engaged environment. So I just want to express my gratitude to CAIR-Minnesota and to the organizers for putting on the third iteration of this conference. So today we're going to spend some more time thinking about the intersections of hate, really, and I think we got a good beginning of some of that conversation in the first plenary section. And one of the takeaways that I got from that earlier session is the obvious point that Islamophobia does not exist in a vacuum. So I'm a historian. It's all of the historical notes that we've been here before. This is another iteration, or this is an evolution of earlier forms of state-sanctioned as well as private acts of hate and violence, obviously really resonated with me. And I just want to elaborate on that a little bit more. I think it was Professor Todd Green who said, this is racism. This is a form of racism. There's many different definitions of Islamophobia, and I think part of the conversation is it irrational? Yes, but it's expressed rationally, and it's made, it's legitimated, it's justified, it's normalized in very rational and sanctioned ways. And I think the more that we think about Islamophobia as a system of hate, as an ideology, and as a form of discrimination, I think that it moves us a little bit further in how we can better understand its intersections and its impact. Another key point here is white supremacy and white nationalism. Undergirding all of these systems of oppression in the United States and much of the world has been a system of white supremacy. It's important to remember that the first others in the United States were Native Americans, and the ways in which we interacted with every other group that came after them was always in relation to where they fit on this hierarchy of our ways of knowing of whether they were savages or violent, assimilable, fit to be citizens, fit to become Americans. And so I'd like us to, as we engage in this discussion about intersections today, I'd like us to think about that historical foundation as well. So some of our panelists you've already been introduced to before, but they were much too humble. And since I have their full biographies, I'm going to take the liberty of telling you just a little bit more about them. So on your far right, Professor Todd Green, Associate Professor of Religion at Luther College in Decorah, Iowa, a former advisor on Islamophobia at the U.S. State Department in Washington, D.C., an author of 2 books. I think we have at least one of them out there for sale up above. 2 books on Islamophobia, The Fear of Islam, An Introduction to Islamophobia in the West, and Presumed Guilty, Why We Shouldn't Ask Muslims to Condemn Terrorism. Next to him is Dr. Hatem Bazian, who you mentioned. If you didn't Google during the break his article, then we'll hear more about it and get the exact citation. He's founded at Berkeley the Islamophobia Research and Documentation Project at the Center for Race and Gender at UC Berkeley. This is my go-to site. When I teach about Islamophobia in my classes at the University of Minnesota, I go directly to this site for not only its amazing research reports that have been produced, but also a really accessible and theoretically grounded definition of what Islamophobia is and its frameworks. He has also launched the Islamophobia Studies Journal, another go-to resource of mine in the study of Islamophobia. It is the only peer-reviewed academic journal on the subject. And he is founder and professor of Islamic law and theology at Zaytuna College, the first accredited Muslim liberal arts college in the United States. Next to Professor Bazian is Lauren Muskelplatt, what I just learned, an alum of the University of Minnesota, has worked at the Jewish Community Action as a community organizer around immigration and worker justice issues. JCA is located in St. Paul. And she currently serves as lead trainer for the SEDEC Institute and other educational initiatives linking social justice issues and action. And then closest to me is Professor Khaled Beydoun, a law professor at the University of Arkansas, Fayetteville School of Law, and affiliated faculty at UC Berkeley. As you heard from him, he focuses on constitutional law, but he is best known right now for two projects. One is his amazing book, American Islamophobia, Understanding the Roots and Rise of Fear. And then, in my opinion, he's been one of the most important sources of information, insight, and compassion in the wake of the terrorist attacks in New Zealand. And if you go to Twitter and look under the hashtag 50Lives, you'll see the amazing work that Dr. Beydoun has done in showcasing and redirecting our attention, the world's attention, to the victims and not the terrorist. So this is an amazing panel. We're so fortunate to have these scholars and experts and activists with us. And what my plan is to open up the discussion for about 10 to 15 minutes of, or as long as you want, of commentaries on these intersections. And then my goal is to leave more time for questions and answers at the end of these formal comments, so that we can start having a conversation with many of you who I think have lots of things to say. So do I have a volunteer for who would like to go first in our panel of distinguished speakers?
Yeah, 3 men and 1 woman. So.
Awesome. Lauren, please start.
All right, everyone can hear me? Okay, good morning. It's really good to be in this room with everyone who's interested in learning about this and figuring out what we do about it. A lot of people have been doing this as lifelong work, and I am newer to the spectrum of this, but I will just share some perspectives from Jewish Community Action and my own personal information. So when we have been working on different social justice issues in the Twin Cities community over time. For about 20 years, we've been around as an organization, and we've kind of always looked at things from this frame of white privilege and looking at the frames of how that impacts people and what is the role for white people to step into and do things. And we've, since the last election, since the last presidential election, kind of been shifting and realizing, like Dr. Lee mentioned, that this is much more systemic than we maybe realized before, and we've kind of changed our approach to looking at both anti-Semitism and Islamophobia stemming from a reality of colonial inheritance, colonial continuation, and seeing how the combination of white nationalism and Christian hegemony have kind of positioned this hateful rhetoric, this kind of systemic way of looking at different groups of people and making them others and dividing them from people who share interests. And so we're really interested in looking at these ways that white nationalism is trying to divide us and separate us, and rejecting that and understanding that that's an intentional behavior in order to stop people who naturally should be in alliance with each other from coming together and resolving some of these huge local, nationwide, and worldwide issues.
Assalamu alaikum. First, let me thank CAIR for